All right, hey there. Today we're going to talk some really classic social psychology stuff. Some of the biggest studies in social psych of all. We're going to talk about conformity and obedience. Remember, we're in that part of our textbook where again, I mean, the theme is I do my own thing. I make my own choices. It's like, no, you do not. There are those unseen forces that are pushing us and pulling us in ways that we're often unaware of. And this chapter is a classic example of unseen forces that are pushing and pulling us. Okay? So we're going to talk about conformity and obedience as different things. It's really an interesting who conforms or what is conformity, and eventually we'll have a discussion of the third paper in this. Well, whatever. So first, let me just read this a little bit. This is kind of a little shocking. During the Vietnam War, as during any war, many acts of brutality were committed by soldiers on both sides, and most people seem to realize this. Nevertheless, one particularly horrifying incident appalled people around the world. On March 16, 1968, American soldiers killed hundreds of people living in a village called My Lai. According to Paul Meadlow, a soldier who participated in the shootings, the leader of the operation, Lieutenant William Cawley, ordered his men to shoot everyone in the village. So here he's being interviewed. I think it was by Mike Wallace. I can't remember, but I think it was a 60 Minutes interview or something. Uh, he told this to all of you, or to you particularly? Well, I was facing him, but the other 3, 4 guys heard it, and so he, Lieutenant Colley, stepped back about 10, 15 feet and started shooting them. And he told me to start shooting. So I started shooting. I poured about 4 clips into the group. And you killed how many at that time? Well, I fired them automatic, so you just spray the area, so you can't know how many you killed because they were going so fast. So I might have killed 10 or 15 men, women, and children. Men, women, and children. And babies? And babies. Now you're rounding up more? We're rounding up more, and we had 7 or 8 people. And we was going to throw them in the hooch. And, well, we put them in the hooch, and then we dropped a hand grenade down there with them. And somebody holed up in the ravine and told us to bring them over to the ravine. They had about 70, 75 people all gathered up. So we threw ours in with them, and Lieutenant Colley told me, he said, "Soldier, we got another job to do." And so he walked over to the people, and he started pushing them off and started shooting. And so we started pushing them off, and we started shooting them. So altogether, we just pushed them off, and we started using automatics on them. What a scary, scary thing. If you think about it now, why would he do this? He relates this horrifying thing in just a matter-of-fact fashion, as though it's completely natural. Do you think that this guy was a complete and utter psychopath? He just enjoyed murdering people? Or, some would say, yeah, he is. He's a psychopath. But, I mean, it was a Vietnam War. Chances are this soldier was just a guy that got drafted, right? He's just an average dude from the street, okay? Other people probably would note that being a soldier in a war-related situation causes a person to act differently than they might. However, what would happen if you were ordered? Okay, here you are, isolated on the other side of the world, and there's a lot of guns around, and you're being ordered. You have no support at all, and even if you disagree, what are you going to do? What are you going to say? Okay? But consider the fact that a large group of soldiers took place in the killings. It wasn't just one. Okay? None of them refused, at least overtly, right? So is it possible that they were all psychopaths? When he was asked why he took part, he said he was just following orders. And for various reasons, it was just the right thing to do at the time. Okay? So he clearly blames the lieutenant in charge, but he doesn't feel it's his responsibility. Okay? We're going to come to this in conformity. And it's very interesting. Or obedience. In this situation, this obedience leads to a lack of guilt on the part of the person that committed the crime because they were just following orders. They were just being obedient. They didn't actually make that decision. So let me first start about talking about conformity. Conformity is a change in behavior or belief as a result of real or imagined group pressure. Okay? Humans are conformists by nature. It's just what they do. Here's an interesting little tidbit I'm sure many of you are aware of, but it's a really good time to bring it up. Did you know if you take a group of women and you put them and you have them live together, very, very quickly their menstrual cycles will line up with each other and they'll be on the exact same cycle. It's what we do. We're humans. Even our biology is programmed to conform with each other, to work together, to be a group, to be a cohesive group. Okay? In Western individualistic societies, the word conformity, in many ways, is a bad thing. You know, conformity, don't be a sheep, dude, think for yourself, something like that. Well, conformity can come in a variety of flavors, and we'll look at some of these. Compliance is conformity that involves publicly acting in accord with something, but privately you disagree with it. Often we conform to gain rewards or to avoid ostracism or something like that. This kind of a compliance is like teenagers that wear the same clothing as each other because nobody wants to stick out and have the social punishments involved in that. Obedience is acting in accord with a direct order. Okay, so go out to go to the store and get me a gallon of milk. And so if you do, that's obedience. Okay. Acceptance is conformity that involves both acting and believing. So many times we obey and comply, but we don't agree with. Well, acceptance is taking it one step further. First, there's three main studies on conformity. Muzaffar Sharif's study here, and then we'll talk about Solomon Asch's study with the lines I'll describe. And then the third classic one is, of course, Stanley Milgram's with the electrical shocks. So first, the simple one, Muzaffar Sharif, he put people into a laboratory, and it was really pretty simple. Number one, this is what happens. If we put you into a dark room, and we just put a spot of light on the wall and let you sit there, almost inevitably you're going to say the spot of light is starting to move, okay? Because it feels like it starts to move in a dark room. That's just called the autokinetic phenomenon. Now, each and every person that is put into this dark room would be like, or you'd say, well, how much did that move? And, I don't know, 8 inches. I don't know, 12 inches. I don't know, 2 inches. I don't know. But almost everybody's going to say, yeah, it does in fact move, okay? But individual differences. So, in this simple study, what Muzaffar Sharif did was he put 3 people into a room, and, what does it say? Day 1? Yeah, on the first day, he put 3 people into the room, and he had them look at the light, and then reporting around each other, he asked the first person, how much do you think that light moved? And the first person's like, I don't know, an inch maybe. And the second person said, I don't know, about 2 inches. And on the third day, or the third person said, I don't know, it's about 8 inches or something like that, 7. On the second day, he put them in the same room, and he had them look at the light, and then the first person said, yeah, it moved about 2 inches, and the second person said, yeah, it moved about 2.5 inches, and the third person said, yeah, it's about 4 inches. And look at this, by the third day, by the fourth day, all 3 of them are giving the exact same response. Now that is the birth of a social norm, just like that. That is the birth of where conformity comes from. Okay? Social contagion. Yawning is a interesting thing. Yawning is a fixed action pattern. This is another example of us being biologically programmed to conform. When we see somebody yawn, and I mean, just looking at this image, you can't stop, okay? Looking at this image on the left, and it turned out if you show this image on the left, most people yawned. If you show the second one with, here, what was this? Yawners. Oh, I see. If you show the thing on the left, almost everybody yawns when they see that. It was a video, right? It was a video. They watch that video and almost everybody yawns. They see the second video where the mouth is blanked out, and we find that most people still yawn. We see the third one, and we see that the mouth is the only thing there, and the eyes and everything else is blanked out, and you get fewer yawns, but still quite a few. And then if the guy just gets up there with a cheesy-ass grin on his face, hardly anybody yawns. So it's really kind of an interesting thing. Just the act of having a yawn in front of you can trigger a yawn yourself. And that's a really odd thing. So here's the second study. This is really crazy. Asch did a couple. This actually is first one. Check out these videos. You know, if you run the slideshow, if you actually run the PowerPoint show and then click on these lines, it'll hook up a video for you. This elevator study that Asch did was so cute because in this one it was just so simple. He you know, people get into the elevator, and what happens is, you know, 8 of the people on the elevator, or 9 or whatever, are working for Solomon Asch, and 1 is just some innocent person, they don't know. And all of a sudden, after about 2 floors, 9 of the people turn around and face the back of the elevator. And so this poor person is standing there going, oh my God, what am I going to do? And so this person almost inevitably doesn't understand why, but turns around and looks at the back of the elevator. It's just classic. It was almost candid camera kind of moment. It was really hilarious. But anyway, the actual study involved, this other one is a line study. So in his classic study, Solomon Asch brings people in, and he brings in, I want to say, 7 people. But again, 6 of them work for Solomon Asch, and 1 is not. You know, 6 of them are Confederates. They work for Solomon Asch, and 1 guy does not work for Solomon Asch, but he believes that the other 6 people are just like himself, naive participants. Okay? So now, what he does is, okay, he says, we're going to do a simple study here where I'm going to show you a standard line, see the one on the left there, and then I'm going to show you 3 comparison lines, A, B, and C. And your job is simply to look at this and tell me which of the 3 comparison lines, A, B, or C, is in fact exactly the same length as the standard line. Obviously, the answer is C. Now, he, of course, makes up thousands of these examples so that he has all kinds of them to work with. And it turns out, by the way, just as a check, if you show these to naive participants completely on their own, they get the correct answer like 99.9% of the time. Okay, so it's not a hard task. Okay, now what happens? He brings them in, and he puts the participants down, and then he puts this kind of a thing up, and then he says, okay, tell me which of these standard comparison lines is the same length. And the first person in the group, remember, there's 7, and the first 5 work for Solomon Asch. The naive participant is sitting in the 6th position, and the 7th person works for Asch. And so the first person says, oh, the answer is C. The second person says C. The third says C. C, C, C. Okay. And so our participant says C. No problem. And so they go through like 4 trials, and everything is cool. But then somewhere around on the 5th trial, he pulls it out, pulls out this one, and which of the 3 is the same? And the first participant says B. B is the same size as the standard. And the second person says B. B is the same size as the standard. And clearly that's just silly, right? I mean, that doesn't even make sense. The third person says B. The 4th person says B. All of a sudden it's up to, 5th person says B. Now it's all of a sudden it's up to Asch's real participant. And this participant, and you can see in this image, you see this guy in the middle, he's just so perplexed. He just doesn't understand. His eyes are telling him the answer is C, but why the hell are the 5 people before him saying that it's B? I don't get it. What are they doing? He's in the videos that you can see, he gets so bothered by it. Yet what happens is he often, definitely not 100% of the time, okay? But like I said, if you let him play the game all by himself, he's correct 99.9% of the time. So he knows right from wrong. Yet lo and behold, and we'll talk about different situations, fairly often he gives the wrong answer and says B. All right? Now, why the heck would he say B when he knows it's not B? He knows it's C. Is he almost like Paul Meadlow or whatever the name of that soldier was at the My Lai massacre? He knows it's wrong, but you know what? You go along to get along, right? Is that what it is? Is that how you describe the My Lai massacre, or something as simple as this? Well, it's a crazy situation how simply people conform in this thing. We're going to talk about later some of the scenes, some of the well, okay, how about this? I'll tell you now just because I don't remember what's on the next slides, and then if I get there and it's there, then I can kind of buzz past it. Solomon Asch did a lot of versions of this, and in different versions, say for example, he manipulated how cool the group was, or how desirable, how about that? Okay, you see our kid there, our real participant in this picture, he's wearing a tie. You know, he must be Mr. Young Republican. So they manipulated the group, and you see in this video, the people on the two sides of them, they were greasers. They're wearing you know, the leather jackets and stuff. So we find that if the group is desirable, so if this little participant is a young Republican and all of the rest in the group are young Republicans, then guess what will happen? He'll be much more likely to conform. So, I mean, what makes a desirable group? That depends on the participant. But if the group is desirable in some way, or if it's high status or something, or literally what it comes down to is if the group, if the 6 other people in the room form some kind of a group that is desirable for this participant, then this participant is more likely to conform. In some versions, what would happen is, you know, the first person would say B, the second person would go B, the third person would go C, the fourth person says B, the fifth person says B, and then our participant comes up, and he's much more likely to go C, okay? Because if he had to just have one other person that supports him, then it's much, much easier, okay? If you have one other person, you're cool. They've done this study in different cultures, and in Asian cultures, they're much, much, much more likely to conform than they are in American cultures. But there was a lot of different versions and a lot of different factors, and we will talk about those towards the end. I kind of remember what's coming up. Here's one. This is the big granddaddy of all, scariest study there is, Stanley Milgram's research. Okay, I'll try to describe this. Stanley Milgram has, to describe the details here, Stanley Milgram has 2 participants come into his laboratory. Now, one of these participants is in fact a Confederate, an actor who works for Stanley Milgram, and one is a real participant. Okay, but again, the real participant believes that the other guy that comes in is also a participant just like him. So now these 2 guys walk in the door, and then Stanley Milgram flips a coin, and it's rigged, by the way. He flips a coin, and he randomly assigns these people to be teachers and learners. But it's rigged in such a way that the coin always flips out so that the Confederate, the guy that works for Stanley Milgram, is in fact going to be the learner. Okay? So it's always set that way, but this kid, this real participant who is now going to be the teacher, truly believes that it was an utterly random process. Okay? Believes that he himself could have been the teacher or the learner. It's just fate that put him there. So now Stanley Milgram says, okay, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to study the effects of electric shock on learning ability, you know, the effect of punishment on learning. And so we're going to, you know, here's what we're going to do. He takes the learner, the Confederate, takes him to a separate room and straps him into a chair, okay, and he says, in this chair, you're going to receive some electric shocks. Nothing too painful, don't worry, it won't, you know, it might be painful, but I mean, it won't cause lasting damage, he says. While they're strapping it in, he gives the teacher, the real participant, he gives him a little electrical, you know, just to, hey, make sure this guy actually believes what he's getting is real, all right, a little bzz. So then they take the teacher, the real participant, back to the original room, and they say, okay, here's what we're going to do in this study. You're going to be reading out word pairs, okay? Say, for example, you're going to read to the participant, to the learner here. You're going to read cup table, okay? And therefore, later on, after you teach it to them, when you say cup, they have to respond with table, right? That would be the correct answer. And so they would be like, okay, we'll start now. Cup, table. Okay, there's the first one. Second one, chair, window. Okay, lovely. Whenever you see chair, window is a response. And so they'll go through and do 50 of them or something. After the teacher teaches them, then comes the testing. So then the teacher says, table. And the participant, and then the way they had it set up was, okay, this is table. Is the correct answer A, cup, B, door, or C, plate? Okay, and so then the learner would press one of 3 buttons, A, B, or C, and inevitably what they did was, now this is all scripted, so that the learner gets the first couple correct. It's like the first 3 correct. Okay, Now, all of a sudden on the fourth trial, you know, the word is, and I forgot what we had, I guess, chair. Is the correct answer A, floor, B, book, or C, telephone? And, you know, C, telephone. Oh, I'm sorry, that is incorrect. And so now we have to punish, right? So what the teacher has to do is administer electrical shock. And the first shock that they administer is 15 volts, okay? And we can see the little shock generator here along the side, and in fact, the shock generator behind my head there, with a banks of switches, okay? Now here's the trick behind it, is that every time that the learner makes a mistake, you need to increase the amount of electrical shock that you administer. Okay, the first shock is 15 volts, and yeah, that wouldn't be but a tingle, all right? You wouldn't even really know it. 30 volts, 45 volts, going up in increments of 15. So going from 15 volts up to 450 volts. Now, just to make sure that these participants kind of know what that really means, because, you know, what do you guys know about voltage sometimes? So what they did was he labeled them. The first three switches had a label above them, something like mild shock or something, you know. Somewhere in the middle, they were clustered into groups of three, and in the middle somewhere it might say, you know, moderate shock or something. More towards the end, it might say something like, it started to say, you know, severe shock. At some point it says danger, and then the last three switches just have an XXX above them. They don't even give it a word anymore. There's XXX, you know, like death or something. So what happens now is, again, this is all scripted, that the learner is going to make exactly the same mistakes at the exact same rate for every single time. And the learner also has a script of things that they're going to yell. After receiving 180 volt shock, for example, after receiving 180 volts, they scream, "Let me out of here! Let me out of here! I gotta get out of here!" Something like this. After, you know, 210 volts or something, he yells, "My heart! Oh my God, my heart!" After 350 volts or whatever the number is, he stops responding. Okay, it doesn't respond anymore. And at this point, you know, the teacher almost inevitably says, he's not responding. And Stanley Milgram is going to say, you know, if he doesn't answer, then consider it a mistake and administer the punishment and move on, you know. So now here's the drill. At some point, I would hope, unless people are absolutely and utterly sadistic bastards, I would hope that at some point people are going to start to protest and say, dude, this isn't right. There's something not right here, okay? This guy's heart is giving out or something, you know? So at one point, most people do complain. And now Stanley Milgram has a set of prompts that he's going to use. I don't remember if I wrote these down here. Do I have them here? Stanley Milgram's oh, here, by the way, this was the script. At 75 volts, the learner yells, "Ugh!" At 180 volts, he yells, "Ugh! I can't stand the pain. Let me out of here!" And has this real big script here. And here it is. Here it is. So if somebody says, "Hey, this isn't right. I don't think we should be doing this," Stanley Milgram says, "Please continue." And often that's enough just to get him started. Okay. If they still protest, he says the experiment requires that you continue. And again, often that's enough to make them start again. If that doesn't work, then the third thing is absolutely essential that you continue. Okay, and again, people sometimes, you have no other choice. You must go on. Okay, and if they continue to shock, they can, you know. And so the question is, how far would people administer electrical shock given just these little 4 prods? If they continue to protest after this 4th prod, then Stanley Milgram says, all right, the experiment is over, and whatever the last electrical shock that they gave, that's where they stop the experiment. Okay? Now, it's kind of crazy. This is it. This is all it takes. Okay? Point this out now. You got a guy in a white lab coat. Now, I'm thinking about the Miley massacre there for a minute, and we could talk about the World War II and the Nazi soldiers in a while too. But you know, all you got is a guy in a white lab coat saying, You must continue. And by the way, here's the setup with the, you see this image on the bottom left corner. We see that the learner is in a separate room, right? The teacher is administering the shock on the other side of the wall, and the experimenter, Stanley Milgram himself, is sitting at this desk in the same room, okay? And often, as we said, where is it now? There's the prods. Oh, and by the way, I want to point out one more thing before I get there. Here is the actual... by the way, this guy is the actor that always played the learner. He is a really good actor. When you watch him videos, you'll be amazed. Although what really happens is, as soon as they strap him in, they actually, as soon as they leave the room, he turns on a recording device to make sure that everything comes out exactly the same every single time. So it's a tape recording. But anyway, you take a look here. You know, this is the actual newspaper newspaper advertisement that was used to get people. We will pay you $4 for 1 hour of your time. I guess it was a bit more money at that time. We will pay 500 New Haven, Connecticut. He was up at Princeton. 500 New Haven men to help us complete a scientific study of memory and learning. The study is being done at Yale. I said Princeton. Princeton's like in Jersey or something, right? I don't know, something like that. What am I thinking? Each person who participates will be paid $4 plus 50 cents car fare for approximately 1 hour's time. And then it says right in there, where does it say here? You will be paid $4 plus 50 cents car fare as soon as you arrive at the laboratory. And it's made very clear to these people, you're not doing this to get, I mean, the very fact that you came here is why you're getting paid. We are not going to take this money away from you. You put it in your pocket. No matter what happens in this room, we will not take away your money. Okay? Before anybody says people are just being evil to get paid. And so here we got an image of how far did people actually shock. Okay? It turns out that 100% of people continued to administer electrical shock up to 150 volts, where it's labeled as strong shock. Around 225 volts, 20% of people have dropped out of the experiment. Okay? But that means 80% are continuing to give very strong shocks. At 300 volts, you're starting to get a little bit more, so up at around 375, where it starts to say severe and XXX, you still have 65% of people. 65% of people administering electrical shock all the way to the end of that shock generator. And it's crazy because these people, you know, when you watch a video, these men, they're cold sweating. They're freaking out. They're just like, oh my God, I can't do it. You can just see it. You can see the relief on their face when they finally push that 450 volt at the end. Just because they're like, oh my God, I'm done now, right? Honestly, at certain times, you know, they show the video, go, but he's not moving in there. He's not responding. Don't you think we should check on him? He might be dead in there. If he fails to respond, consider it incorrect, shock him and move on. And he gets to the end of the 450, and in some cases, oh my God, was Milgram cruel? He just said, you know, please continue at 450 volts. And it was like this guy is like almost crying. He's in so much, but he does it. All it took was a freaking white lab coat. The guy is almost dying. He is just cold sweating. He's just like, oh my God, I can't believe I have to do this. And he just does it, and he does it, and he does it. And it's really painful to watch it. When you watch it, it actually creates nervous giggling in yourself as you imagine the possibility. And so the question, would you do it? And it's like, no, not me. Hell no. I am one of those people that would have dropped out right at the beginning, right? I don't know, man. I don't know. So Stanley Milgram's, again, watch this video. There's lots of different videos about this on the web. But clearly this study could not be performed today. And in fact, it was this study that prompted the American Psychological Association to put down a formal, there had always been informal ethical codes, but it made the American Psychological Association put down a formal code of ethics for research, which is followed to this day. It's a very important part of research. clearly debriefing, which, by the way, from a research perspective, debriefing is what you do at the very, very end of an experiment when you tell people exactly what happened in the research study. You describe what you just did, and can you imagine this situation where you say, okay, thank you for participating, go home now, and these people are like, oh my God, I think I killed a human being. No, you have to debrief them, right? You have to tell them what happened. When you followed up with the teachers, because there was a lot of worry about the psychological harm, because, I mean, you can't even imagine the cold sweating they were doing, how bad that was for them. But when they did follow-up studies with them, they in fact offered counseling, therapy, and the participants seemed to be okay. They didn't seem to have any long-term damage, but I find that hard to believe. I cannot imagine having how much different my life would be. Because, I mean, at this point, I'm going to tell you, I'm one of the very few that would have dropped out. All right? Can you imagine how much, and I'm sure each one of you are thinking the same thing, can you imagine how much differently you think about yourself if you found out that, in fact, you were not one of the ones that would drop out? You were, in fact, one of them that would zap them all the way to the end? That would change your perception of who you are, wouldn't it? All right. So, again, Milgram did a lot of different versions of this study. Okay, he did different versions, different things, and found different levels of obedience. Let's say in some of his studies, he measured their level of moral reasoning. Okay, using Kohlberg's stages of morality, which we briefly described at one point, and he found that there was a strong correlation between the level of morality, a negative correlation in this case, between level of morality and the amount of electrical shock that they would administer. In other words, people whose moral reasoning was at a relatively low stage on Kohlberg's stage administered more electrical shock. Okay, so that's not a huge surprise, I guess. If the victim was in a separate room, there was more electrical shock administered than if the victim was in the exact same room. And look at this image that you see here, in this particular version, the experimenter had to actually press the victim's hand down onto the electrical shock generator. There was the least amount of obedience. This is the situation where this guy was much more likely to take off. He's like, forget this. I can't do this. Okay. Now that's not a surprise either. By distancing yourself from the violence. And in fact, this is something very important in Nazi Germany. When they first started this extermination of the Jewish people, they at first had their soldiers. Remember now, their soldiers are just average dudes. These are just guys on the street. Last week, this dude was the butcher. Last week, this guy sold bread. But today, you're going to ask him to take a gun and shoot your neighbor. Okay. Well, it turned out that they had an awful lot of problems. The German army had a lot of problems with soldiers saying no and refusing this order. And so what they decided to do was put together the gas chambers, because it was much easier to, if you could make the violence anonymous. That is, if you could distance the act of violence from the act of death, it was much easier for these soldiers to do. And so, your job is not to pull the trigger. Your job is simply to push the switch to the on position, wait for 5 minutes, and turn it to the off position. Well, okay. On. You just killed 1,000 people. So, he manipulated how close he sat. Remember, we showed you that Stanley Milgram's desk was in the room. Depending on how close that desk was, the closer the desk was, the more obedience there was. Legitimacy, that is to say, he did the experiment once. Like I say, he did it under the guise of Yale University. But in some other versions, he did it in some local warehouse, and he didn't tie his name to Yale. He just said, we're going to do it a study. And they were like, no. People were not obedient. It was something about the name Yale, that somehow it cleared their conscience or something. Oh, if this is science, well then it must be okay. Something like that. And yeah, he even messed with, oh yeah, that was institutional authority. No, he messed with the way he was dressed. Okay, if he was dressed in a white lab coat, people were much more obedient than if he was dressed in jeans and a shirt. Something about a white lab coat just breathes, genius or something. And then in other versions, what happened is just as a participant shows up, they have the person before them going, I won't do this, I'm leaving, boom, something like that. And if there was a model for disobedience, then the participants were much more likely to disobey. And so here, yeah, the three main ones were Sharif with norm formation, Asch with conformity, and Milgram with obedience. Okay, and so we can imagine that because I believe that's an essay question on your second exam. I can't remember for sure. So anyway, Milgram and Asch devised experiments in which, oh yeah, you know what? I wanna take a quick pop back. I didn't mention it at first. At the end of World War II, most people around the world looked to Nazi Germany and were like, how could that happen? How could people turn such a blind eye? How could they be sadistic bastards? What is wrong with German people? What is wrong with them freaks? Okay? And there was this giant assumption around the world that, in fact, German people were just sadistic bastards. They were subhuman or something. Well, lo and behold, Stanley Milgram wanted to show that that's not true. He wanted to show, here is his quote that he comes out of it. The most fundamental lesson of our study is that ordinary people simply doing their jobs without any particular hostility on their part can become agents in a terrible destructive process. They just, and remember we already said earlier that not only do we harm people that we dislike, but we come to dislike those people that we've harmed, okay? And if you're just following orders, I mean, just imagine this poor German dude. He was, like I said, he was a baker last week. He had some good he used to play canasta on Saturday nights with his Jewish neighbor. What the hell, what do I care? Now he's being told he has to hate the dude. Not only do you have to hate him, but you have to start killing him. And all of a sudden, pretty soon, as soon as he starts killing him, he does, in fact, start to hate him. Okay? It's just kind of bad. All right. So check this out. Conformity. You find, oh, this was a classic study. It's so simple. I had people standing on a sidewalk and just looking up at a building. Okay? And now passers-by. Will the passers-by also look up at the building? If there was one person, if you go to the far left side of this graph, if 0 people are looking up at the building, then passers-by do not look up at the building. That's pretty straightforward. If one person is standing here looking up at the building, where am I at? About 40% of the people stop and look to see what's up there. If 2 people are looking up at the building, we see about 50% of people stop and look. If 3 people are looking, as soon as you get to 5, if 5 people are looking up the side of the building, 80% of passers-by will also look up. And at that point, it doesn't matter if you have 10 people looking up or 50. Once you pass 5, there's just the amount of conformity is pretty well set. So the size of the group does matter to a degree, and after some point, the size does not matter anymore. And again, we already said this. This is in 2 different cases, both in Asch's study and in Milgram's study. If there was even one, in Asch's study with the lines, if there was even one person that said, hey, the answer is in fact C, that was really enough to break it. Then our participant would do it. And likewise, if that one person would show a model for disobedience in Milgram's study, it was often enough. Okay? Cohesiveness. If you have a group which is tight-knit, then conformity is stronger. Okay? In a group that is just hastily thrown together with no real connections to it, we'll talk about what groups are later, but if you just throw a group together without a real connection, cohesiveness is not there, and therefore conformity will not be there. The more cohesive a group, the more conformity. Okay? And likewise, as we said, culture. If a culture encourages conformity, then there you go. Lower social status individuals exhibit more conformity. Or even more, like I said, if the group is viewed as high status. Okay? forcing a public response makes for more conformity. Again, in a version of Asch's study, the every person says B, 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 and then Solomon Asch's person is told to write it on a piece of paper. So he writes his answer on a piece of paper. And as long as, it doesn't matter that they all gave the wrong answer. As long as he puts his down secretly, he gets the right answer. Okay? Or here, if we make a prior commitment that are faced with group pressure to conform to a different thing, we rarely back down from our original position. Okay? And so this is actually pretty interesting. A prior commitment. This is something that is got potential for like the DARE program, right? The DARE to keep kids off drugs or something. Or they are having high school kids filling out a no sex contract. I forget what they call it. Abstinence contract, I guess they'd call it. But the idea is you want them to make a prior commitment so that later on when they're faced with pressure, they've already sort of committed themselves and nobody wants to look silly. Remember that? In the past, my behavior was, remember the cognitive dissonance arises when your behaviors don't match your attitudes. What I did and etc. Okay, whatever. So why do we conform? Two possible reasons. One of them is normative influence. We conform because we want to be liked by others. We want to fit in. Nobody wants to be the odd man out. Okay? We do not want to be different, so we play along. The second one is actually kind of sensible and is often ignored, by the way, in this kind of research. Sometimes we conform because, if you stop and think about it, the guy in Solomon Asch's study, he's like, he's like, okay, the first guy said B, the second guy said B, the third guy said B, the fourth guy said B, the fifth guy said B. It looks like it's C to me, but, I don't know. What makes more sense to you? That 5 people are wrong, that I'm wrong? Hopefully we have enough courage to admit that if 5 people believe something is true and you believe something different, there's a pretty good chance that the other 5 know something you don't know, right? They have access to some knowledge or something that you don't have. So is there some kind of a personality factor, like a conformity social factor? There's personality factors for anything. We could talk about tons of them. But it doesn't seem to be. There doesn't seem to be a personality trait that predicts conformity. Conformity is almost always predicted by the situation that people are put into. Okay? There's not really some people are a little bit more conforming than others, but by far the majority of it is situational. Culture influences conformity. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And then finally, I love this one. So, we got all of this stuff on conformity, but do we ever want to be different? Do you ever want to be not different or not the same? I love this Reactance. I love this comic, okay? There's this sign. It says, absolutely no machete juggling. And this guy's like, suddenly I have an urge to juggle machetes. What the hell is that, right? That's Reactance. A motive to protect or restore one's sense of freedom. It arises when somebody threatens to take away our freedom of choice, okay? It's a rebellion inside of us. We all have that as well, and teenagers perhaps have more rebellion than anybody else. If you want a teenager to do the dishes and you tell the teenager, absolutely you cannot do the dishes. I'm not sure if it would work, but I'm going to have to try that, right? All right. And finally, I got this slide. I don't know where I found it. I don't know. I'm just thinking of the geniusness and how this would work as a conformity test. Which is bigger? And somebody might say, well, A is bigger because it pokes out a little bit further. And some might say, no, B is bigger because it occupies more actual space on the screen. And I don't know exactly how I would use this, but someday if somebody's watching this and they have an idea about how I might use this idea to run a test of conformity, you let me know. I would supervise that one, all right? So why don't you keep your eyes open and check out the, what am I trying to say, the video that I'm going to explicitly talk about writing paper 3, all right? I'm going to, as soon as I stop this video, I'm going to make another little short one where I discuss that. So keep your eyes open for it.